Okay, I'm over here at the back of the haul truck, and I've got the grinder over here with a 36 grit flapper disc on it, and I was just starting to clean the back of those springs up a little bit. Welcome to part 52 of the haul truck. Let's jump into it right now. Okay, I'm back in here a couple of days after I posted the last haul truck video, and what I'm going to do is I've got to pull this thing back up and put the pin back in. So I was cleaning it out, just wanted to make sure that it was cleaned out, get that pin back in there, make sure that I could be able to lubricate it good, and that it would be lubricated beforehand before I put it back in there again. I still haven't gotten that other pin out. As a side note, I still haven't gotten the other pin out, and I need to do that so that I can do the same thing. Clean up the pin, clean up the bushing and the spring leaf, clean it all up so that it can be lubricated well. But I want to get this, I need to get this back in there again so that I can figure out the geometry of how the air suspension is going to work. I'll bring you back. Okay, so I was able to get that pin back in. It was a little harder than I kind of thought it was. You have to kind of jack up both sides at the same time because that spring gets compressed a little bit between the kind of the overload leaf and the pivot leaf. So it gets compressed a little bit, but I got it. Okay, over here behind the axle, and as you saw from the previous video, I kind of shifted it forward underneath those springs. What I've done is pulled a line, a measurement. It happens just to be a random measurement. I used 15 feet. It could have been anything. What I did is pulled it off of the front axle so that I would have a line that is parallel to the front axle to measure the position of the rear end off of. I just want to make sure that the rear end is running parallel to the front axle. Now I'm also going to check it off of the frame, etc. Maybe even pull a measurement off the back, but the back could be random. I mean, they probably didn't put as much control into the length of the overall frames as they did in aligning the axles or having them run parallel to each other. So I drew that line, and it happens to be 15 feet. I used 15 feet. It could have been anything. The measurement isn't as important as the parallelness to the front axle, which I want to get the rear axle positioned off of. And then what I did is I just took some clear paint and sprayed over the line so that the line stays permanent on the floor for a while. Okay, so back over here at the rear axle, I showed you that clip of how I put the line on the floor so that I could run a parallel line from the front axle to measure off of to set the rear axle. Now, what I did is dropped a plumb bob down in the center of the two frame rails to try and align the pumpkin, the pinion gear coming off of the center of the pumpkin. Let me just insert a little clip here. If you guys are looking for a video where I am working all the time, this isn't the one for you. This video is going to be more concerned about that rear axle geometry, how I did it, how I laid it out, and how and why I'm doing it. So if you're looking for me to be working a lot, this is the video for you. I have got work done, but you're not going to be able to see, you're not going to see it in this video. So back to the original clip. I'm not really sure if that's going to be center or not, so I'm going to do some other measurements on it, measuring the hubs off of the frame rail. And why I say that is because the axles are different on it. The pumpkin is actually offset. In other words, the driver's side axle is much shorter than the passenger side. But then if you notice, the pumpkin is shifted so that the pinion gear comes out more towards the passenger side. So I'm not sure if the center line of the pinion gear, pinion shaft, let's call it, is supposed to be in center, and the only way I can verify that is try and set it in center and then go over and measure a reference point on the hub, whether it be the rotor or where the wheel studs go into. It shouldn't matter because they should both be the same on each side. Measure that off of the frame rail just to kind of verify that that should be in there. And what I'll do is I'll take you over. I'm not really sure if you get a good reference on it by looking at the axle from this position, but I'll take you over and show you the axle shafts out of the rear end. So back over by the workbench where the axle originally was, where I tore it apart originally, and here is the axle shaft out of the driver's side and the axle shaft out of the passenger side, and you can see there's probably 3-4 inches of difference in the length of them. But I think that is offset by how that pinion shaft is kind of offset in the pumpkin. But I will verify that by setting it at center and then measuring off the frame rails to a reference point on the hubs. But I'll bring you back. So one of the things that I just talked about was trying to center the pinion or make sure that the axle is a reference point on the hubs is the same on both sides. Whether it's going to put that pinion shaft in the center or not is yet to be found out, but again, that's what's going to happen. So I talked about the line. I talked about trying to center the axle. Whether, regardless, I'll do it off of the hub or off of the pumpkin pinion shaft. Regardless, whichever turns out to be centered, I will do it that way. So we've got the line, and what I'll try and do is make the axle is parallel to that line is physically possible. So another insert in here. I know that there's a lot of names for different types of suspensions. The bar that I talk about to add lateral stability to the axle, because the rear is suspended, or is going to be suspended by airbags, which are not rigid and tight and don't lend lateral stability to it, is called a panhard bar. But just understand that there's a lot of people that might be watching this and don't know the nomenclature for stuff like that. So when I say that a bar will add lateral stability, just understand that it is a panhard bar, but you can call it different things. Talking about some bars that are going to go out to the front to add more stability to it. Now, I do realize that the leaves are there, but I also want those bars to be a little bit adjustable so that if I need to tweak the axle position, I can do it by adjusting those bars that are going to wrap up there. I might call them traction bars, but they can be called anything. It could be a 3-point or system, 3-link system. There's so many different people call it different things, and let me just say that I understand that everybody has a different name for it, but let's just go with what I call it. Now, you know that I'm going to be putting air suspension on the back of it, so there's going to be airbags on it, and then we have this fixed point that's going to be here, that's going to be attaching the springs via a plate to the axle, and the pins that are in the bottom of the spring and the pin that sticks up out of the axle has all been discussed. So we have that. What at some point in time I will also be doing is bringing a bar off of the front and extending it out on both sides and attaching it to the frame rail somehow. Whether you want to call that a traction bar or not, it's going to be very similar to it. But what it's going to have is an adjustment on it. So if the axle is not exactly parallel to the front axle, I can adjust it one way or the other to stop the vehicle from tracking. And you have all probably seen, whether it's a car or a truck or a semi-trailer that tracks because the axle has shifted a little bit one way or the other, and it looks like it's going down the road kind of sideways. So I will, by using, and let's call it traction bar, a suspension bar that goes out to the front that is adjustable. If I don't have it precise, I can adjust it by shifting one side a little farther than the other side, or that way. So then I've also got to do is figure out the ride height, the ride height that I want to keep the axle at in conjunction with the frame rail, and how much adjustment I can get out of the airbags that way. So in doing so, there's another factor that has to come into play, and what I've got to do is kind of figure out the angle that the pinion gear was set at. There's always a predetermined angle that the rear end, or the pinion gear, let's call it, is set at in conjunction to the frame. Whether it be 1 or 2 or 5 or 6 degrees, it's usually always shifted upwards a little bit. In other words, that pinion gear shaft would be shifted up at a slight angle in relationship to a parallel frame. Now, a lot of people might not think it's important to do that, but it is important, and let me explain one of the reasons why it's important to do that. Some people might think that it's irrelevant, you could just run it out level, and because the universals, how you doing, bud? Okay, so insert number 3. You saw where I got interrupted and I was talking about the universals, and some people might consider or think that the universals will take up any adjustment in it, but there is some other factors, and plus I will go into the other factors after this insert, but when I come back from being interrupted. But the universals themselves and the driveline angle need to be as optimal as possible so that you don't get driveline vibrations while you're going down the road, or you don't put a lot of wear on the universal joints. Now, I understand, you've got to understand that there is going to be a carrier bearing or in another set of universals in that driveline at some point, so that the angle between the differential or the pinion on the differential and the transmission can be compensated for another set of universal joints and another way of trying to tweak that angle of the driveline back into place. But let me bring you back to where I left off. Okay guys, sorry, somebody came in and was looking to figure out where they could buy something, but I kind of lost my train of thought. I think I was talking about the angle of the pinion gear, but or the pinion shaft. One of the things, the back of the pumpkin is curved, and it's curved to accept the distance or the ring gear, the curvature of the ring gear. So this thing is curved. But this curved surface also provides another purpose. There is no pump on the oil in the back of these housings. So what it does is as the ring gear spins around, it picks up oil and brings it around itself to help lubricate the pinion gear and shaft and the bearings. Sometimes these things are very meticulously engineered to make that work well, to keep the oil temperature down in this. So the degree that it's set at, and what I will do is I'll try and reference what this axle was originally designed for, the degree of pitch on the pinion shaft. It was designed so that that oil would distribute evenly and not build up a lot of heat in it. Now, some people think that, that doesn't matter. They think maybe actually adding more oil to it helps it. In some cases it might help it, some cases it might not do anything, but there are some cases where it actually can hinder the performance of the ring and pinion gear, and it can actually build more heat into the oil. So keeping the oil in here at the proper level and keeping that pinion gear at the proper pitch is a very important thing. So what I will do is I'm going to be taking these measurements and trying to figure out all of this, and I probably won't film any of it because it's just going to be putsy work and nobody's really going to want to see me doing it. But if I run into complications or run into any issues with it, or after I'm done, I'll bring you back and show you what I came up with and describe to you how it was accomplished. Okay, I'm over here at the rear of the haul truck, and what I've done is set the axle off of the line. Now, what I've also done is had to shift the axle back. Apparently it's not where the pinion gear comes out of it is not the center of it. What I did is took a measurement off of the frame rail to the side of the disc brake, and that measurement is within 1/8 of an inch right now. The measurement from the axle housing back to this line is actually right on right now. Well, probably within a 32nd of an inch measured with a tape measure. What I actually did is took a square and put it on that line and then measured from the axle housing out to the square, and that's within a 32nd of an inch, even though a tape measure doesn't measure a 32nd. You know, split the lines in the thing on 16ths, and it's within a 32nd. So what I'm gonna do is I've kind of went onto Dana's websites and tried to find a degree of angle, and I can't. But I have the old plate, and what I'm gonna try and do is use that degree of angle. Now, given the fact that I also have to find where this thing is going to be positioned for the springs too. So once I get it positioned so that I'm kind of in the center point or ride height on the center point of the spring travel, I will take that angle that the spring is at in relationship to the angle of where I'm going to set it according to this angle, and we'll have to add or subtract them angles together depending on how it works out. But anyways, the axle is set now. Again, might have to shift it a little bit one way or the other from side to side, but that will be compensated. I'm gonna have, I forgot the term right now, but there's gonna be a bar that comes off of the housing and goes up to the axle to keep it from the axle from shifting side to side, because it's going to be on airbags in the back, so there's no stability to keep it from shifting that way until you lock it in from side to side. Okay, so kind of in conclusion here to 52, what I've got to do is machine this for the angle, machine the plate, that 1-inch plate, drill it for the pins. This plate that holds the U-bolts into it, I've got to lengthen. This plate was for the old axle, and as you know, the girth of the new axle is a little bit wider, so I've got to make another plate like that just to have notched for the top of the U-bolts. So I've got some fabrication machining work to do to get this to start the airbag brackets out. But I'm not going to show that in this. I might show some brief clips just so that you know that I'm going to be working on it, but that's probably going to be part of a shop update or fabrication type of thing in a shop update. But that's kind of where it's going to go. So there's going to be some time that's going to be spent in fabrication and machining of those brackets. So probably not a lot of other things are going to be done on the haul truck, but I'll bring you back. Thanks for watching, guys. Hit that like button, subscribe.